Welcome back to Within the Book, a series where we explore what's within the book of tabletop role-playing game design. Today, we talk about what I'm going to call approachable versus investment. In the context of this video, approachable is going to refer to games that are easy to learn and pick up, while investment refers to a game that is deep and can often have nuances that reward player engagement. I'm calling it investment over something like complexity or intricacy because it's more about encouraging the player to invest their time through the game's deep systems and mechanics. You would think that approachable and investment represents a dichotomy. The secret about all this is that I believe any game can have both.
You're out of order.
What? I'm out of order. You're out of order. The whole freaking system's out of order. You want the truth? You can't handle the truth. Because when you reach over and put your hand in a pile of goo, that was your favorite mechanic, you'll know what to do. Forget it.
I'm out of here.
Been informed. It's actually not a big deal, so I guess I'll just get back to the video. I found that there's often a temptation to design something elaborate, something that can predict every course of action and provide a structure in each case. While this is something that is achievable, it's likely to take years of work. The simulationist approach to design is not for everyone and can bog down a game while also often not creating investment, but complexity for the sake of complexity. But hey, if that's what you want to do, then go ahead. What you want to achieve through what I'm calling investment is a design that can provide a structure for creating memorable moments and interesting choices. So, how can we encourage this in our designs? Here are some ideas I have. Consider using an opportunity cost. This is when a choice the player makes will restrict or delay other choices the player could have made in that moment. Subclasses in D&D 5th edition are an example of an opportunity cost. Personally, I prefer when an opportunity cost delays rather than restricts. While this somewhat undermines the opportunity cost, I find that's preferable to the negative player experience of entirely restricting choices. Another example of this are action systems. I feel Lancer is a good example of this, as their full versus 2 quick action opportunity cost provides an interesting structure for player tactics and strategy while within mech combat. Consider using a risk versus reward. This is inherent in many tabletop role-playing games, as rolling dice against the difficulty number is a basic form of risk versus reward. It could mean dealing damage to a monster or overcoming an obstacle, but it could also mean wasting an action or potentially taking damage from the obstacle. This isn't much of a risk versus reward, and so introducing further layers on top of rolling dice can contribute to investment in the mechanics or systems you're designing. You want to keep in mind that the risk and reward always need to be symbiotic, meaning the greater or smaller the risk is needs to be accurately reflected in the reward. Due to this, risk versus reward tend to demand more playtesting and balancing. A good example of layering risk versus reward is Dungeon World's hack and slash move. To explain this briefly, when a player uses this move, they roll 2d6 plus their strength. If their outcome is 10 or more, they deal their damage without retaliation. They are then given the choice to deal more damage, but must take an attack in return. Generally, bad risk versus reward patterns tend to have an imbalance in either the risk or rewards, making it too free or too punishing. It's also important to telegraph to the players the risk and reward up front. This is to allow the player to make an informed choice. You don't want to rug pull the players with your designs. Consider mechanics that enable the leveraging of fictional positioning. Fictional positioning refers to a literal or metaphorical position in the ongoing narrative of your game. So, it could be something like above the monster, or my character is a member of a chivalrous knighthood. Blades in the Dark's position and effect mechanics are an excellent example of leveraging both sides of fictional positioning. To explain this further, when a GM sets the position, they decide between 3 options based on the current fiction that help contextualize the consequence of failure, with controlled being the least harmful, risky being the default, and desperate being the most harmful. This example from Blades in the Dark is perfect. Setting the effect works similarly, as the GM again chooses between 3 options based on the current fiction. Effect, however, contextualizes success the player could have with that action. This is key, as mechanics that leverage fictional positioning need to account for factors that contribute positively and negatively. Blades also allows for trading position for effect, and vice versa. This is a great risk versus reward mechanic, but it also allows the player to take full control of their character's position in the fiction. This interaction example here is an absolute banger. To concisely illustrate my point, I'm going to read you this verbatim from the rulebook. The ability to set position and effect as independent variables gives you 9 combinations to choose from. This helps you convey a wide array of fictional circumstances. For anyone still confused about this, don't feel bad. It is confusing, but hopefully this last example from Blades will help. Blades' mechanic position is also an example of another consideration, which is called failing forward. Generally, it refers to a failed roll being recontextualized as success, but with a cost, meaning the narrative is always forwarded rather than stopped. In Blades, it does that and also forwards the narrative further by allowing the player to try a failed roll again at a lower position, effectively systemizing the idea of a character taking risks and becoming more desperate. Damn, Blades sucks. I mean, honestly, it's a little too good. They're out here taking our lunch money with their fantastic design. Like, leave some for the rest of us, John Harper. You make me sick! Firstly, I want to make it clear that games that are very approachable can create an investment in players, but this is generally due to its lightweight rule set, narrative first focus, or striking setting. Approachable games doesn't necessarily mean that they are purely narrative, entirely abstract, or methodologic. These elements can be hard for new players that aren't familiar with this style of game or for players that are coming from a video game touchstone. Personally, I believe an adaptable GM and a group that's on the same page can make even the most impenetrable games manageable. What you want to achieve through approachable design is to provide a structure for smooth GM and player experiences. How can we encourage this in our design? Here are some ideas I have. Consider resolution mechanics that are mathless or math light. You could use a system like Fate, or you could use a deck of cards. You could even use something like the game Dread that uses a Jenga tower. Your goal with this kind of mechanic is to minimize time loss calculating while maximizing the narrative of the game. Consider reducing the emphasis on skills or entirely removing them in favor for a heavier focus on ability scores and their equivalents. This will streamline your game and save you time coming up with names for a skill list that encompasses everything. Consider simplifying advancement. Rather than updating your entire character sheet each level like in Pathfinder 2e, you could target a few key elements of your game for advancement. These elements include stuff like ability scores, skills, abilities, health, equipment, bonus to hit or damage. There are probably more, but who has time for that? Importantly, this will only simplify your game if these elements are already simple. Consider a classless system. This is going to vastly streamline your game's character creation and advancement. It's not for everyone, but the whole point is that there's a trade-off. This is lowering the investment needed for the game, as it heightens its approachable nature. If you haven't played a game without classes, I would highly recommend it as a design exercise. Check out the game Knave for examples of all these points. It's only 7 pages, so you have no excuse. Ultimately, your game is at its best when you're passionate about it, and the easiest way to achieve that is to focus your designs on the systems and style you enjoy. All this video is trying to highlight is that a game can have elements of both styles, and I think it's possible to have a game be accessible and have depth. So, how can we tie everything together we've talked about so far? The first thing to consider about this whole approachable versus investment thing is that it's not a linear scale. It's not like when you reach a threshold of one or the other that your game belongs to either camp. You want to think about it more like a negative correlation. This is a fancy way of saying that the more investment mechanics you have in your game, the less approachable it is, and vice versa. If you're still designing your game, check out our video on core experiences. Once you've defined that, you want to decide where on the scale of approachable and investment you want your game to be. Next, you want to pinpoint the mechanic or system that most represents your core experience. This should be the one thing about your game you want to tell everyone about. Ideally, you want this mechanic or system to have high investment, meaning that it's likely to be less approachable. But we can compensate for this by adding or changing other key elements of your game to be more approachable. The goal is to decrease your high investment elements by cushioning them with connected elements that are more approachable. The last step is to playtest your game, no matter how complicated or simple you think it is. This could highlight areas of your game you may have overlooked that are contributing to this feeling, or you might find out that it's fine. You always want to verify your assumptions through playtesting. Despite whatever you think about D&D 5th edition, I think it did a pretty good job of being more approachable than previous editions by squishing math through its proficiency bonus mechanic and streamlining player choice through its subclasses and making feats optional. For better or worse, I don't know. For behind the scenes, we wanted 4 things. First, we wanted to give characters the opportunity to make many actions in combat. To help achieve this, we designed a D6 pool resolution system that includes 3 types of dice: positive, neutral, and negative. To put it simply, positive is always good, negative is always bad, and neutral have a chance to be good or bad. This allowed us to add a mechanic in combat we call cumulative action penalty or cap. Okay, let's say a player attacks and they succeed, but they now want to make another attack. Because this is their second action, their cap is now 1, meaning their second attack adds an additional negative dice. If the player wanted to continue making more actions after this, they would add an additional negative dice equal to their cap value. The player can choose to end their turn before taking another action, but must end their turn if they ever roll our version of a critical failure, which becomes more likely the more negative dice they have. Second, no skills. I don't like skill lists in games, and we want to make a video on the topic, but suffice to say, I feel it limits creativity of players more than it helps. Instead, we skip the middleman by allowing players to use any of their character attributes for any course of action. Granted, this can lead to some ridiculous situations, but we suggest to GMs to allow these situations with the caveat of added difficulty. We group this into one action we're calling exert. We hope with all this to eliminate some investment from learning a long list of skills and any surrounding mechanics. Third, we want an encounter system to represent involved non-combat scenarios. We needed a way for GMs to establish fictional positioning in a system that was intended to represent almost anything. To do this, we introduced a trait mechanic that informs the player of what's going on in the encounter, but also contributes to the difficulty. But only if the trait is fictionally relevant to the action the player wants to take. Speaking of actions, we decided on 3 types: execute, scheme, and improvise. To put it simply, think of these actions like completing your objective, decreasing difficulty, and defending against the GM's actions. We decided that these 3 actions would mechanically work like an exert, but the outcome is guided by which action the player has taken. By doing this, we hope our showdown system will be approachable, as players should be familiar with exerts. Ideally, all this should help to create a structure that can be applicable to a wide range of situations. Finally, we wanted open character advancement. We wanted our game to allow players the option to take any class's abilities, not only in their starting class. We also wanted each character's abilities to be levelable. To offset this high investment idea, we would split character classes into combat classes and non-combat classes, while allowing players to start with one of each. On top of that, each class will favor one of the ability scores in the game. So far during playtesting, players have felt that they don't receive enough opportunities to increase their starting abilities and to also get new abilities from other classes. We're still considering our options here, but I thought this was a good opportunity to reinforce that playtesting and iteration is crucial to the design process. Thanks for watching the video. Let us know what you want to hear us talk about next time. Do all those YouTube things and see you then.